In this video, we're going to work with more of the layers panel options. So we've already seen how to rearrange the order, but now we're going to work with some of the settings at the top here. For instance, the opacity. It's pretty straightforward. Right now, I'm on the green triangle layer and I'm going to lower the opacity, and you'll see that I can actually see through to the white of the background. Will be a little bit more dramatic if I do it with something like the blue square. You can see that it's actually adjusting the transparency, which changes the color because it's making everything opaque. So each one of these would be affected, and you can use more than one at a time. So if you want to have a lot of semi-opaque layers, you can. I'm going to bring that back to normal. 100% is the default. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the modes. So here with modes, it says normal, and we did this with the brushes, but in case you forgot, you can change it to things like dissolve, and if you lower the opacity, it'll actually not change the opacity, but when it's on the dissolve mode, it will change the amount of specks that are making up a shape. This is really helpful if you're trying to create artwork for silk screening, because it doesn't actually create a blend, which you can't burn, but it creates a dot pattern, which you can burn. Another mode that you might want to play with is multiply. I use that a lot. It's basically having a color fall on these other colors. Pretty dark. You'll see something that we use it in for the application sketches later. And I can just sort of scroll through and you can see if any of those catch your attention. For the most part, I tend to use dissolve and multiply. The other options that you have in your layers panel are down here, where you might want to start using some effects. And I'm going to sort of go with what I'm used to using, which is the undoing that, the layer styles here. So if I go into this drop down, I can start seeing like how I can affect the brightness and contrast of the entire layer set. And if I'm working with groups of layers, I can do it to individual groups, and I can adjust the properties here. I'm going to undo that layer by deleting it. I could also make it invisible if I just want to get rid of it temporarily. The other thing you can do is just double click on a layer itself and play with these layer styles, which I like to use if I'm trying to get a drop shadow. Here's the drop shadow option. This is obviously dropping very far away, so I'll change the angle and I'll change the distance, and you can see that that appears to have a shadow now floating above it. You can change the spread, which would make it actually look less like a shadow, so I'm going to keep it soft, and changing the size as well as the opacity. That would be very subtle. Distance, angle, contour. A lot of these I don't mess around with too much, but it gives you a sense of how you can work with the layer without actually changing the artwork on that layer. You'll notice that the artwork is exactly the same in the panel options, but this effect has been added. So if I want to temporarily get rid of that effect, I can just make it invisible. And then here with the drop shadow, I can put it back on. I can also have multiple effects happening. So I'm going to double click on this again and say, what about a pattern overlay? A pattern overlay is going to give me the option of, I should be able to have that in here. Oh, I see what's happening. It's actually putting the pattern overlay into the same effect as the drop shadow. So I will stop that here and use the pattern overlay on another layer so that you can really see it. Double clicking on it, go to pattern overlay, and you can see here that there's a pattern being dropped in as an overlay, and I can play with the scale, the opacity. Let's go a larger scale. I can change out the pattern. And this is another way of creating artwork without adjusting the original. You're just giving it the effect that you want. There are many others here. They're all worth playing around with, but I think for a demo, this should give you a good enough idea how to work with layer styles.